art of Witch Hat Atelier is majestic and one that I have been enamored by. Shirahama's rendering style looks so good, so I thought to myself, why don't I try and study it and make my own piece in her style? And what better time to do that than while I'm on vacation and can not work on any manga or anything else and just have my iPad at my disposal. So let's dive in and study Kamome Shirahama's art from Witch Hat Atelier. Foundations of this piece was that I wanted to draw myself as a pointed cap witch, a pretty simple, basically just drawing my OC. So to begin with, I did some rough sketching out of the character design. I tried to limit myself to 4 to 5 colors, since the character height reference sheet I found breaks down each character into 4 to 5 main colors that make up their character. Luckily for me, in the process of making a new Vtuber model for myself, I made color references based on the base colors of my model. With that, I just moved on to broad composition choices. I remember reading somewhere or watching a video that all the witches in Witch Hat Atelier are designed with a triangle-shaped composition in mind. However, I searched every interview I could find and couldn't find the source of that, so take that with a grain of salt. And if you do have the source, please leave it in the comments below, because I feel like it's real, but I don't want to spew in for misinformation. But either way, I'm going to operate under the assumption of the triangle composition, and you can see it especially in the character height sheet that I mentioned. It's not always the cleanest triangle, but you can make the argument that their silhouette is a triangle shape, and that's good enough for me. The pointed hat witches especially have a pretty obvious point to the triangle because of, their pointed hats, which helps just give a starting point to build off from. The other key design things I added were making the inner part and cape a different color than the outside, since that's the case for Elrugio and Elira. I also just like clothes like that, so I made the outer part of the cape a dark blue, while the inner part is the red color. I also made a robe tie made of 2 sticks that are vaguely the shape of Ceres Fauna's branches overlap with each other, because why not? As for the background, I had the brilliant idea to make the background a spell from the series. I initially started with this one, but realized late in the process of drawing that most of the spell lines were obscured, so I opted for a more ornate one that could be seen around the silhouette of the character. And let me tell you, it is hard as hell to draw these spells. It's very possible to do, but trying to make it look remotely good was rough, and I ended up just using the symmetry tool to have the work I needed to do, because I would have been there for 3 hours, and I was not built for that. Speaking of the symmetry tool, given that a triangle has 2 equal sides, shout out elementary school math for that one, I mirrored the cape shape while building out the overall shape of my character. I opted to have a lot of the character covered with the robe because the whole premise of the series is that they have to hide while they cast the spells. And if you look at most of the major witches in the series, they all have robes that go down to their boots or cover a large majority of their body. Which makes sense given you want to cover everything but still allow for easier movement so you're not tripping over your robe while walking. But speaking for their robes, I love how Shirahama is able to give each major witch such distinct outfits. For having such a well-established form and function of their clothes, like it has a job that it needs to perform, and it does. She does well to add flair where she can, while still doing the job it's supposed to do. Take these outer robe bits at the top corners of most of them. I don't know what they're actually called, but they're all so distinct and add some color variety to what ultimately could be a very simple one-color robe. Across all the characters, Shirahama really knows how to make such a vibrant and cool design to look at. Especially Kifri, who looks fairly normal while he's in the default pose. When you put him in motion, his robe adds astronomical amounts of aura to every interaction and pose he hits. For contrast, my final design is much darker. Some of that is just given the colors that I'm working with, but I still like how it turned out. It took a couple of iterations to figure out a design I like, but ultimately I got there. Whenever I'm designing an outfit for a character, I tend to just do multiple simple iterations with just the base colors for every piece. It helps me look at the overall color balance of the outfit and make changes as I see fit, because you don't want to just overwhelm with one or the other. You want to make there be balance, and also just that nagging itch in your head that's like, it could be a little better. Because as always, art is a process, and I'm on vacation for 5 days, and while I don't have a ton of time drawing that at that time, I'd rather not rush to the finish when I'm not fully satisfied. The broad strokes of the design remain the same across iterations, but every little improvement made it look just a little bit better in my eyes. Now, before we continue on to the final piece, consider subscribing for more art studies. I love doing them and definitely need the practice, so there will be more videos like this. And feel free to comment an artist or manga artist you'd like to see a study on. I already have a few in my mind, but I'm open to suggestions. But now, without further ado, here's my process for what ended up being the final piece. I started off with the spell shape in the back to give me a general idea of where I wanted to place my character in the composition. Then I busted out the good old head size reference for myself and the good old round brush to take a very rough outline of the piece. I was initially going to try filling in the composition with a round brush blocking, because I saw a YouTube video on it and I was like, I'll try this, but opted to just do the overall shape and then just do a rough sketch of the line art. A lot of my art growth lately has been taking a step back and taking that extra time to refine things. There's always this internal pushover to make one good line art and call it good, but I'd finish a piece and then have gripes with line art because it was rougher than I wanted. So instead of trying to mold the piece at the last hour, I'm just gonna take the extra time to do another round of line art and refine. Since I was working on Procreate, because I did not have a computer at my disposal, I had Procreate. I opted to use my old reliable syrup brush for the line art because I love and adore it, and even if it's probably not super close to Shirahama's, I like the brush, so I'm gonna use it. Plain and simple. But with the line art done, I had the base colors of the character, then decided to change the spell so that you can actually see it around my character. And then I add a rough background based on the spell being the one that keeps the snow off Coco's house when it is winter and her mother in the rock is still, there, and we gotta keep it warm. And then I go on to the hatching battlefield. One of the key defining traits of Shirahama's art is how she hatches clothing folds and textures. It's these lines that look to be one stroke, but commanded with a masterful control of the pen. She does draw them physically, which adds her more control and more of the ability to kind of take off and ease the brush and stuff like that. I can't quite have that exact control with the brushes I have, / also I am not good enough to do that. So instead I simplified the process to be variations of thin lines with dots every so often. It's a similar idea, but not one stroke. It was more just letting my whims take me on how I wanted to make the lines end up and adding variety whenever I thought it got too stale. Sometimes I just let the beat of a song determine the strokes, or I just decide to add a dot, so I did. And with the final piece, you can see the effect it has on the texture of the piece. I love how it looks and it adds so much richness to the overall outfit. But then I compared it with Shirahama's, and boy oh boy, do I feel like I overdid it in a few places. I think the best area is the shoulder plates on the robe. They feel like the best balance of texture without feeling super overboard. I think the belt definitely goes a bit overboard. I maybe could have eased off it in the middle parts. The pants one is okay, but looks messy. I did use this picture for reference on the shading, and the difference is night and day. The cape edging is probably the messiest because I do not know how folds work in that pose. And since I made the pose out of like 4 different things, I had trouble with that. And also, I still struggle with how to add lines and like stuff like that with darker ones because it's not super obvious. Although I realized with the cape, I could have just used the reference for shading as well because it's a similar enough pose. But hindsight is 20/20, even if my vision isn't. A lot of my hatching issues could be solved in one of 2 ways. First is by just studying more of how Shirahama does it. I tried to refer back to her art while doing it to keep it fresh in my mind, but I definitely could study more examples to look for patterns and give myself a better understanding of how and when she chooses to add the hatching. And secondly, by just studying folds for clothing, since that's most of the time where the lines are added. It is one of my weakest areas at the moment, and one I try not to just ignore, but also when I don't have a clear reference for the folds and just kind of vibe it out, I go, yeah, that's probably wrong. I kind of just guess and check without properly working to understand the underlying concept. But all things in due time. And finally, for my mandatory haiku reference, this whole study was an attempt of fostering my own growth through experimentation. I don't want to let myself get stuck in bad habits early on, so I made the conscious decision to challenge myself with a new technique. And the day after finishing the piece, I was already putting it into practice designing characters for my next manga. I used the hatching technique to add some detail to the character's clothes, because that's the joy of art. All the studying can find use in so many different areas. It doesn't necessarily need to be just texture on fantasy-like clothings. It could be a whole style of an outfit. Every choice and skill that I pick up will coalesce into a piece that is truly my own, imperfections and all. An art style really is just all of the decisions you make smashed into one. So even if my attempt at Shirahama's style pales in comparison to her actual art, I gained a new tool in my repertoire. And for me, that's a fantastic reward.